Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Yes, I am in my truck. We're not vlogging, we are doing a wrap-up. So, I'm in the truck with the air conditioner going, so hopefully it's not too loud, but y'all, Wanda B being a loud little puppy when I am trying to film, so I thought we would try and film in my truck. I don't know how this is gonna go, but let's go ahead and get into it. So today I have my June reading wrap-up for you, and I read 15 books in June. I do have a wrap-up for 9 of the books that I read. I'll have that linked in the description if you missed that, where you can see more of, like, it's sort of like a mid-month wrap-up. It didn't work out that way. It was just like a recent reads video, but it was the first 9 books I read this month. So I read 8 historical romance, and I read 6 contemporary romance, and I ended up having only a few books that I absolutely loved, so I'm going to tell you which ones they were, which ones were my favorite books of the month. So I ended up having 3 books that were my favorites of the month, and they are A Lady for a Duke. This is a 6-star read. This is one of my favorite books of the entire year. I adored this historical romance, and I actually reviewed this in my May reading wrap-up because I had finished it like the day I filmed that, which was like the 1st of June, and I just had to talk about it. So this one was a favorite. Another favorite, no doubt, is Twisted Lies by Huang. I had an arc of this book, and I adored it. We'll get into my thoughts on that in just a second. Fabulous. Loved it so much. And then my third favorite book was the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is a nonfiction book all about essays about things that John encounters in his life and his reflections on them and how that affects humanity. I did talk about this in a reading vlog, but we're going to talk about it in just a minute. Just a concise review because I adored this and I feel like everyone should read it, to be honest. Okay, so the first book I want to talk about is 11 Scandals to Start to Win a Duke's Heart. This is the 3rd book in the, is it Love by Numbers? I believe that's the name of the series. So this is the last book in this trilogy of Sarah MacLean. This is her first historical romance trilogy, and this was the last book that I had to read before I had read all of Sarah MacLean's historical romances. She does have one YA book that she has also written, and you know, she's written for anthologies and things like that, but I'm not sure that I want to read her YA book. I'm sure it's great, but I'm just not really vibing with YA much anymore. But this was good. I gave this book 4 stars. It's about our heroine and our hero, you know, like, this feels like, to me, this felt like a first book in Sarah MacLean's newer style. Like, I think that the first 2 books in this series really hold pretty closely to very traditional historical romances. They have very similar tropes, a very similar feel to early 2000s historical romances, although I'm not entirely sure when they were published. Yeah, so this one was published in 2011, but they feel more typical of a, not necessarily an older, but what you would consider to be a typical historical romance. They felt like they just they fit right in like a perfect little puzzle piece in historical romance, and there was nothing really unique or special about them, but they were still like good reads. Like, I gave both of those, I think I gave them both 4 stars. Maybe the second one I gave a 3-star. But I mean, they were solid reads, and I think that if you are new to historical romance, this would be a good series to start with, depending on what you want. But this book to me felt like the beginning of Sarah MacLean's newer style, where she really has more like heroes that have more, like, they're more focused on consent, more focused on the heroine's, like, desires. Like, something about Sarah MacLean that I really, really love, and I know that some people don't, is that her heroes, the most important thing to the hero in the book is the heroine's agency, honestly. And so you will never really see, specifically in her newer books, you will never see her heroes, that I can remember, I might be wrong, really sort of force their will on the heroine. They oftentimes will make hard choices, something that they don't want to do, to let her have her will and her agency rather than forcing their will on her. And I find that really refreshing and just beautifully done. And this was sort of what I felt like the building block for what will become her style in the future. You know, like, since this series, she has written 1, 2, 3. She's on her 4th series, and that's a lot of books. You know, like, one of those trilogies. Two of those are trilogies, and one is a series of 4 books, and then she has her second book in her new historical series. So she's got a lot of books under her belt from this book to that. And I mean, I think that if you really wanted to, you could see the beginnings of her style in 9 Rules, but to me, this one felt very much like a foundation for what her writing will become, and for that I really, really loved it. It feels like a bit more dramatic, a bit more romantic, a bit steamier, really focuses on the heroine's agency almost entirely, and I just really, really love that. This is about our heroine who is actually, she's a sister of a hero in a previous book, and she has like scandal following her wherever she goes. She's a favorite subject for gossip in the ton, and the hero is trying to find a wife who gossip hasn't touched. But of course, they have this electric connection, and they work out a deal to have their passions satisfied. So I enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I think that, I mean, honestly, if you like Sarah MacLean's books, you'll probably like this a lot. I just have a great time almost every time I pick up one of her books. I think there are very few of her books that I'm like, wow, I wish I hadn't read that. Actually, there are none of her books. I love all of her books, some more than others. Some I have given 3 stars, but most of the time, if I really want a fiercely feminist historical romance where the hero really just worships the heroine, like, I reach for her. She's a queen. Okay, so the next book that I read was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. So this is a nonfiction book. This is just a series of very short essays about things that he notices in his life and how he draws like a parallel between certain things in his life and the state of humanity, or how people behave, or what is happening in the world with the people in it. And the Anthropocene is the geological age that we are living in right now, where man is the like dominant species on Earth, and there are some reflections in here about the state of the planet, about animals who either have become extinct or who will become extinct, and what's in our future as humanity. And I just found this to be deeply compelling because each essay is very short. It reads like he's telling you a story, and there's always these little points of just like beautiful wisdom in there that like make me feel hopeful about humanity, and a little bit melancholy, because it is John Green and he does tend to be a little bit of a melancholic writer. I feel like most of his books have just a hint of sadness, or maybe sometimes like a lot of sadness. I haven't read many of his books, actually. This is only the second book of his that I've read, but the one book I did read emotionally damaged me forever. So I loved this. This was just beautiful and honestly just perfection. And I think that if you want to feel a little bit of hope about humanity, like, I would highly recommend this book. It was fabulous. Okay, so the next book that I read was Twisted Lies by Anna Huang. I did get an arc of this book. This is her latest release. It just came out a week ago. I think June 30th is when it came out. And this is the last book in the Twisted series, so this is book number 4, and I gave this book 5 stars. I had a great time reading this. It is definitely very long, and I have heard some criticism for how long it is, and I think that that's fair. You know, like, when I'm reading a book that I'm not super invested in and it's long, like, I absolutely hate it. But this book just worked for me all around. I didn't really even mind the length. And that's saying a lot, considering that I was reading this physical, because it was an arc. Like, I just was eating every interaction up. I felt like it was beautifully layered. It had great background with the characters and their motivations. I did have a few issues with what happened in the third act conflict, but it wasn't anything that honestly dimmed my enjoyment of the book overall. It was stuff that I just pointed out and I was like, well, you know what I mean? Like, things like, so I feel like this is an interesting book for me because I was so invested in their romance, and specifically the hero. Like, the hero is one of the best protective, possessive, you know, heroes that I have ever read. I think that he just literally worships Stella. He's just fantastic. He's very much a morally gray hero. I adored him and their romance so much that I was willing to overlook quite a lot of flaws because I was just like so invested in their romance. And I think that when that happens to me, when I find a couple or a romance that has been built up to the way that I want it to be, that is a little bit slow burn, that is developing over time, that gets me really hooked into these characters' lives, I can overlook quite a lot of things, to be quite honest. And then I can objectively say, yeah, I can see your point there. But for me and my reading enjoyment, the things that I loved about it were way up here, that I was willing to overlook any flaws. So the length didn't bother me. Even though I had issues with the third act conflict, it wasn't a deal breaker. I still gave it 5 stars. I think if you like this series, you're going to love this book. And even if you don't, I still think you might like it. It is long, it's slow burn. It takes a while to build up their relationship and the overall story. But man, like, if you love a possessive hero, like, you're gonna love this guy. He is the head of, like, a security company. He's a morally gray hero for sure. He does a lot of bad things, and he has had meetings with Stella that we've seen in previous books, and you could just feel their chemistry in the previous books. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get their book. It's going to be fantastic. And it was. I just loved it. I just had a great time. So the whole book is around them. The heroine is Stella. She's like a social media influencer. She's trying to get a million followers because her social media career is kind of dwindling. She's lost her main job. She's taking care of her nanny who has Alzheimer's, and she's kind of feeling like her life isn't going the way she wants it to when she finds out that there is this opportunity for some influencers to get, like, sponsored by this big company, and she really, really wants to, but she doesn't know if she's going to be in the running because there are other people whose social media platforms are bigger or doing better than hers. And so Christian notices this. They're talking. They live in the same apartment building. He owns that apartment complex, and I think he's the one who proposes the idea that they enter into a fake relationship, and it would benefit both of them, and that way she could post photos of him as long as it's not his face on social media, and that really propels her social media career. And so it's their fake relationship, forced proximity. He's kind of her bodyguard because she has a stalker, and that comes in and is just absolutely done to perfection with this protective hero, and I just had a great time reading it. I really, really loved it. I think that the length of the book is really going to be a personal preference issue. I know a lot of people don't want long books, but I personally love them, especially if I'm invested in the characters, and I felt like I really was here. So if I'm invested in the characters an author is creating, I really don't care how long the book is. Like, I don't want to say goodbye. I want to have those characters in my life forever, and the tension in here, the sexual tension in here, was chef's kiss. It was perfection. So I enjoyed it a ton. 5 out of 5 stars. Just had a great time reading it, and I just loved it. Okay, now on to a book that I have some pretty conflicted feelings about. So this is No Tomorrow by Carrie Ann Cole. This is the first book in a series. The second book isn't out yet, but it's going to be the next, well, rumor has it, it's going to be the next book Carrie Ann Cole publishes. It's a contemporary romance, and it is a rock star romance, and it's very, very long. Very, very long, like over 500 pages. So, like, I know I just said, I don't know if it's over 500 pages, it's close to that. I know I just said, like, I don't mind long books if I'm invested in the characters. If the author has built up a character that I feel attached to and invested in, I don't care how long that book is. I'll follow that character anywhere they go, to be quite honest. And this book never really bothered me. The length didn't bother me in this book either because so much was happening. This is a romance that spans years. Like, by the time we're done with this book, I think we have followed this couple for like almost 20 years, maybe. I don't know if that's actually true or not. I've read somewhere that it was 20 years. Yeah, 20 years. So, and a lot happens. This book is very, very heavy. It is very heavy. Let me just tell you the trigger warnings for this book that I noted in my review in case you need them. So the trigger warnings that I noticed were mental illness, drug abuse and addiction, loss of a pet, loss of pregnancy, and attempted suicide. So those are the ones that I noticed for sure. So our book opens with our heroine, who is really sort of not doing great. Like, she's not feeling great about herself. She doesn't really feel like she's appreciated. She's kind of one of those heroines who's a little bit like lost, and you can tell that she's like looking for approval or looking for connection. And at work, she goes out on a break and she finds this street musician, and they have this connection, and that is what begins their decades-long love story. The hero, Blue, is the street musician. He's homeless at this time when she meets him, and he shows her what I would consider to be a very small amount of kindness, and that kindness meant so much to her that she then spends the rest of her life doing everything she can to be with him, to help him, to center his feelings. And that's really honestly my biggest issue with this book. I gave this book 3 stars. And there were times, this book took me all month to read, because I would read it and then I would be like, I would either find myself checking out, not being really invested in the story, or I would kind of be getting frustrated and be like, if I finished reading this book, I'm probably going to give a rant review about it, and I didn't want to do that because, you know, I feel like I've done that a lot lately. So I would stop and start it a lot. But then there came a point when we were about halfway through where I just was very invested in the story, and I think like the overdramatic nature and the toxic nature of this relationship, like there came a point where I was like, I don't know that I am convinced this is a love story, that this is a romance, but I am deeply invested in finding out how this toxic relationship works out, and I want to see how they're going to get their happily ever after. So really what compelled me to finish this was more a sense of curiosity of, how is this going to work out? But also this sense of, I know this book is very meaningful to Carrie Ann Cole. She's talked about it quite a lot, the meaning that this specific couple has to her and her life. And I mean, the way that this relationship is set up, like the nature of their relationship is so very toxic, almost, I would say almost emotionally abusive on the part of Blue to Piper, although that's difficult to say because he is mentally ill, although that's not disclosed until the very end. I felt like it seemed to me like Carrie Ann Cole, she had to obviously be deeply invested in this story, because I do think that she handles this story with a lot of care, but it was a tough read, you know, like it was not a happy read. I don't think there was a moment of this book where I felt good, where I really was, you know, enjoying their romance, because I just never was fully invested in their romance. And that all comes down to, for me, that their first meeting when they fell in love, I don't know that I ever even believed they were in love, but when they fell in love in the beginning, it wasn't a strong enough story of them falling in love for me to believe that all of the angst and the sadness and the despair that he put her through was worth it. And she truly does. Like, she centers his feelings so much. Everything that she does, she's like justifying his feelings and his actions, everything that he does, the way that he treats her. She's trying so hard to do everything she can to make him happy and to help him, but he never does that with her. So it's difficult for me to get really on board with a romance that feels that off balance, that feels like an imbalance of power is swinging so hard in favor of the hero, and she's just like practically killing herself to make sure that he is happy, that his feelings are more important than hers. And I'm not saying like it can't be enjoyable for some people, but I found that really difficult to truly believe that they were in love, because a big thing for me about love, about buying into a romance, a love, like a pure love, not any, you know, not just like a steamy romance, not just like a flirty romance, but to believe that this is an epic love story, which I think she was trying to do here. That first connection has to be powerful enough for me to believe that going through all of those years was worth it, because he really is kind of terrible to her. Like, he's not physically abusive. He's not like calling her names or anything like that, but just the way that he sort of keeps her dangling by a thread the whole book, like their whole lives. It was just like, I like the whole time I was like, why are you with him? Why? Why? And I feel like if that beginning, them falling in love, had been stronger for me, I would have been able to put up with everything that he did, because that's the kind of sucker that I am. If I believe the love is strong enough, I can see that my couple get through anything. But I didn't feel like that at first, because it felt like, to me, when they fell in love, it felt like, first of all, their first sex scene felt borderline non-con. Like, that made me super uncomfortable. But also, it just didn't really feel like love, because it read to me like, here's a man, this attractive man, he's an artist, he's a really great guitar player, and he's showing her this bit of kindness, and she clings onto that for the rest of her life, you know? I will say that I did enjoy their happily ever after, how they ended up together, but do I believe that this is an epic romance? For me personally, no. I don't. Was I invested in how they got their happily ever after? Yes. And that's really why I gave it 3 stars. Like, if I hadn't been invested in the story, if I hadn't really felt swept away by Carrie Ann Cole's storytelling, I wouldn't have given it 3 stars. I would have definitely given it 2 or 1. but there's something about her writing that is very almost addicting to me, and I just really find myself captivated by the stories she's telling. However, I do have one minor gripe with the writing in this, and that's that Carrie-Anne Cole's writing from this book to Storm, her first book, improved by like 20 million%. Like, it was a vast improvement. Her writing really grew and developed from Storm, which I read like a month ago or something like that. And I really like her writing. I think it's really solid right now. I think that she is a great writer. But I did notice that at times she would do this thing where she would show you the heroine being strong, doing something that showed you this is a strong woman. And then she would put you in the heroine's head and say, because I'm a strong, independent woman. And she did that a couple of times. She did that with Blue too, showing him as a bad boy, and then the heroine would self-insert because he's a bad boy. And I wish that she hadn't included those self-insertion moments where she's telling you, because she already showed it to you. And this is something that is kind of a personal pet peeve of mine, because I don't want to be spoon-fed what our characters are doing or thinking. You showed it to me. You did a good job and you showed it to me. I don't need to hear from in their internal monologue that they are a strong, independent woman. You just showed me that they were. So that's a minor gripe. I think that she did good showing and she didn't need to tell, and I wish that she had just cut that part out. So she did that several times over the book, and it got to the point where I was noticing it, and I'm like, I wish you would stop doing this, you know? So 3 stars for this. I do see the appeal. It was really compulsively readable. I just never fully was bought into the epic romance, which is what I believe she was trying to do here. Alright, the next book that I have to talk about is Up All Night with a Good Duke by Amy Rose Bennett. I received an audio arc of this, and I really enjoyed this. The audio narrator did a great job. I gave this 4 stars. I think this is one of the better, newer historical romance releases I've seen this year, and I just had a great time. It was very unique. Our heroine's name is Artemis, and she is really wanting to start a university for women. And by night, like unbeknownst to other people, she is a gothic romance novelist, and she is developed a name, like a pen name for herself, that is becoming very popular. Our hero is the dastardly Duke. He is believed to be very dangerous because people think that he killed his mad wife. So these two end up in a relationship because she wants his help to get this school started, and he wants her help to sort of raise his 15-year-old daughter, who is recently causing him a lot of headache and heartache. And so they have this working relationship worked out. However, of course, they have a lot of chemistry and a lot of strong vibes between them, and they end up falling in love. I enjoyed this. I thought it was very fun. I do think the middle portion lagged and slowed down a little bit. The beginning part was very strong, and the ending was also very strong to the point where I couldn't put it down, but I enjoyed this a lot. I had a really good time reading it, and yeah, I'd recommend it for sure. So, alright, those are the books that I read in June that I haven't talked about yet. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what your favorite book was that you read in June, and I will see you in my next one.